The icy rain wasn't just falling, it was attacking, a horizontal barrage that turned the neon glow of the Sapphire Sovereign Casino into a distorted watercolor. She collapsed not with a sound, but with a silence more terrible, a mere folding of limbs on the rain-slicked concrete driveway reserved for $250,000 cars. Inside, in his soundproofed office overlooking the storm, Viktor Orlov watched a high-definition security monitor. He didn't see another piece of street debris. He saw the delicate curve of a jawline he hadn't seen in 18 years, the jawline of his sister who vanished without a trace. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl to the men flanking him. "Bring her in, now." To his empire of high rollers and velvet ropes, Viktor Orlov was an untouchable king. His name controlled the city's shadow economy, a man who solved problems with a whisper, not a shout. But the storm had washed a ghost onto his doorstep. The girl shivering under medical blankets in his private suite wasn't a stranger. She was Sophia, his little sister, who vanished into the night 18 years ago when he was just a street-level enforcer. Her return was impossible. And the secret she carried would force him to choose between his kingdom and his blood. The night Sophia disappeared, Viktor was 22, holding together their shattered family with sheer will and his fists. Their parents, honest immigrants who owned a small grocery, had been killed in a hit-and-run that was never investigated. Viktor knew the truth. It was a message from the local boss, Kirill Andropov, for refusing to pay protection money. With his parents gone, Viktor had two jobs: raise his 16-year-old sister, Sophia, and burn Kirill's operation to the ground. He promised Sophia he would build a safe world for them. For 2 years, he worked brutal, legitimate construction jobs by day and planned his revenge by night. Then, on a Thursday, he came home to an empty apartment. Sophia's school bag was by the door. A single note in her handwriting read, "I'm sorry, I can't watch you destroy yourself for me. Don't look for me." Every lead went cold. He turned his grief into fuel. The construction worker vanished, and Viktor Orlov was born, a calculated ice-cold force who systematically dismantled Kirill's territory. He didn't just defeat Kirill, he absorbed his operations, but with a ruthless efficiency that avoided Andropov's careless brutality. The casino, the Sapphire Sovereign, was his masterpiece. It wasn't just a money launderer, it was a symbol, a legitimate-facing empire built on the ashes of the kind of corruption that killed his parents. He ruled from a penthouse, surrounded by silent men in suits, his heart a vault sealed shut 18 years ago, until the storm. In his private medical suite, a Dr. Viktor kept on retainer finished her examination. The girl on the bed was malnourished, hypothermic, and bore the subtle marks of a life on the streets. But it was her. The childhood scar above her left eyebrow from a fall off a bike, the specific shade of chestnut in her hair, same as their mother. Viktor stood motionless by the window, watching the storm abate, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. His head of security, Leo, a man who had been with him since the early days, cleared his throat. "Boss, we traced the jacket she was wearing. It's from a shelter over in the warehouse district. St. Vincent, they have a log. She's been using the name Anna for about 6 months. Viktor didn't turn. And before that, Leo's silence was answer enough. A ghost for 17.5 years. "Who else knows she's here?" Leo's voice was low. "The 2 men who brought her in. The doctor, me, that's it." The casino logs show a standard welfare check for a person in distress. Protocol. Viktor finally turned. His face, usually an unreadable mask, was etched with a turmoil Leo had never seen. "Keep it that way. She doesn't leave this room. The doctor doesn't leave this floor." "Understood," Leo nodded. The unspoken truth hung in the sterilized air. Sophia Orlov was supposed to be dead. Her reappearance was a vulnerability. In Viktor's world, vulnerabilities were exploited. For 3 days, Sophia slept, drifting in and out of consciousness, murmuring in half-remembered Russian. Viktor conducted his business from the adjoining room, a command center of screens and quiet phone calls. He watched her on a monitor, a haunting echo of the vibrant girl he failed. The empire he built, every ruthless decision, was meant to create a fortress where nothing could be taken from him again. And yet, here was the original loss, returned in the most fragile possible state. On the 4th morning, his external threats crystallized. A report from his intelligence network landed. Marco Ferranti, the head of a rival syndicate eyeing his shipping contracts, had gotten a whisper. A whisper about Victor being distracted by a personal matter. It was a fishing line, but it meant someone was watching. The fortress had a crack. That afternoon, Sophia's eyes opened, clear for the first time. She took in the luxurious, impersonal room, the IV in her arm, and then the man sitting silently in a chair across from her. Her breath hitched. Time had sharpened his features, layered muscle and power onto his frame, and cloaked him in an aura of imposing authority. But the eyes were the same, the ones that read her bedtime stories. A single tear traced a path through the grime still on her cheek. Victor. Her voice was a dry rasp, broken by years of disuse and fear. He didn't move, afraid any gesture would shatter the moment. Sophia. He said her name like it was a relic. You've been gone a long time. A sob escaped her, followed by a wave of trembling. The confused, lost woman was gone, replaced by someone swimming in a tide of pure panic. You have to let me go, right now. You can't let them know I'm here. Victor leaned forward, every instinct on high alert. Let who know, Solnishko. The old nickname, Little Sun, slipped out. She flinched as if struck. The men who took me. The room went preternaturally still. Victor had spent 18 years believing she had run away from his violent path. The foundation of his entire life narrative cracked. Took you, he repeated, the words deadly soft. Start from the beginning. The story spilled out in fractured pieces. She hadn't left willingly. Two men, smelling of cheap cigarettes and Kirill Andropov's favorite cologne, had been waiting in the apartment. They had a photo of Victor leaving a rival's bar, a fake, doctored to look like he was making a deal. They told her they were police, that Victor was involved in the murders she feared he'd commit, and that she needed to come with them for her own safety. 16, terrified and wanting to protect her only brother from himself, she went. They didn't take her to a police station. They drove her to a dock and put her on a cargo ship bound for Europe. She was a hostage, a piece of invisible leverage held by Kirill to ensure Victor's compliance during their war. But Kirill had died in a car bomb Victor had nothing to do with before he could ever play that card. The men holding her, with their assets suddenly worthless, simply abandoned her in Marseille. A 16-year-old girl with no papers, no money, and no language. She survived. She lived. For 18 years, she believed the lie. She believed Victor was a monster who had gotten their parents killed and was deep in a criminal life. She believed staying dead was the only way to stay safe. And she believed the men who took her might still be out there, might still be watching, might see her connection to him as a liability to be cleaned up. Victor listened, his expression granite. The hit and run, her abduction, all Kirill's work. His entire reign, his identity as the city's untouchable king, was built on a foundational lie. His war was justified, but his reason for fighting was based on a sister he thought had abandoned him, a sister who had actually been sacrificed for him. The guilt was a physical weight, but beneath it, a colder, sharper realization took shape. Kirill was gone, but organizations don't die with their leader. The men who took her, the structure that allowed it, remnants could still be out there, in his own organization. The doctor chose that moment to enter for a checkup. Sophia immediately shut down, her eyes darting to the door in terror. Victor stood, his chair scraping loudly. Out, the doctor retreated. He moved to the bed for the first time and took his sister's fragile hand. Look at me. No one is taking you ever again. You are safe here. But she shook her head wildly, a desperate, trapped animal. You don't understand. They told me things about the night our parents died. It wasn't an accident, Victor. They showed me a report. The car that hit them, it was registered to one of your drivers. The air vanished from the room. The carefully constructed story of his life, the righteous vendetta, shattered. His voice was a whisper of pure menace. What did you just say? The room seemed to tilt. Victor's grip on Sophia's hand tightened, not with menace, but with a desperate need for anchorage. A report, he echoed, his voice hollow, shown to you by the men who kidnapped you, and you believed them. Sophia's eyes flooded with fresh tears, but they were tears of frustration. I was 16, Victor. They had badges, they had photos of you, and the registration, it was clear as day. I memorized the number. She recited a string of letters and digits, a plate number. Victor knew every vehicle in his fleet, past and present. That particular prefix was from over 20 years ago, from his father's small delivery van business, the one that was struggling before the accident. A cold, sickening understanding began to dawn. It wasn't one of his asterisk drivers. It was one of his father's, a man named Joseph, a quiet Pole who'd worked for the family for years. He released Sophia's hand and stood, turning his back to her, staring out at the city lights now glinting in the post-storm clarity. His entire life had been a monument to a specific truth. Kirill Andropov killed his parents to extort them, and he, Victor, had destroyed Kirill for it. It was a clean, brutal equation that justified every hard choice. But what if the equation was wrong? What if the car wasn't a random thug, but a vehicle from his own family's modest business? The implications were a poison spreading through his veins. He spoke without turning, his voice controlled but terrifying in its quietude. Rest. Do not speak of this to anyone, not the doctor, not the nurse, no one. He left the room, closing the door softly behind him. In the adjoining command center, Leo was waiting, studying a bank of monitors. He took one look at Victor's face and stiffened. "Boss." "The night my parents died," Victor said, his eyes fixed on a screen showing the empty hallway outside. "We never saw a police report. The investigation was closed in 48 hours, called an accident, hit and run." Leo nodded slowly. He knew this history. "I want that report, the original, not the public file, the one buried when Kirill paid off the precinct captain." Leo's brow furrowed. "That captain retired 15 years ago, moved to Florida." Victor finally looked at him. "Then bring him back. Use whatever incentive is required. I want that file on my desk in 72 hours. Leo didn't ask why. He simply nodded. "And," Victor added, the word hanging in the air, "pull every record we have on a Joseph Wozniak. He drove for my father's grocery delivery service. I want to know where he was the night my parents died and where he is now." The next 48 hours were a study in silent, furious tension. Victor conducted his business with a distracted intensity, his mind a battlefield. He sat with Sophia during meals, coaxing fragments of her story, the shelters, the false names, the constant fear of being recognized by the ghost of her captors. Her existence was a raw, open wound in his carefully armored life. Meanwhile, Leo's network churned. The retired police captain, found on a golf course in Sarasota, was surprisingly compliant after a single, brief conversation about the legal implications of historical evidence tampering. A scanned copy of a handwritten supplemental report appeared in Victor's encrypted inbox. Report was a bombshell. The responding officer had noted tire marks and paint scrapes inconsistent with a simple loss-of-control accident. He traced a partial plate. The registration led to a vehicle reported stolen 2 days prior from the Orlov family groceries delivery lot. The officer's recommendation: investigate possible stage theft and deliberate homicide. A follow-up note, initialed by the precinct captain, simply read, "Per standing directive, case closed. No further action." The standing directive was Kirill Andropov's unofficial policy on investigations into his affairs. So Kirill was asterisk involved. But the stolen car changed everything. It wasn't a random criminal's car. It was a weapon stolen from the Orlovs themselves, a cruel twist meant to muddy the waters. Or was it? A new, more terrible question emerged. Who stole the car? A random thief for Kirill, or someone closer to home? Joseph Wozniak, according to Leo's digging, had quit his job the day after the funeral. He'd given no notice, collected his final pay, and vanished. His last known address was a dead end. He'd effectively fallen off the grid 20 years ago. Too clean, too convenient. Victor stared at the grainy, decades-old driver's license photo on his screen. Joseph had been a slight, nervous man, the kind of man who could be pressured, the kind of man Kirill would target, but to steal the car himself, to be an active participant in the murder of his employers, that required a different kind of evil. Sophia, growing stronger, noticed the storm raging behind her brother's eyes. "You found something," she stated one afternoon, not asking. Victor looked at her from across the suite's living area. She was wearing clothes his assistant had bought, soft, expensive fabrics that hung loosely on her frame. She looked both alien and intimately familiar. "The car was stolen from our lot," he said flatly, "2 days before." Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. "So, the driver was either a thief or the man who reported it stolen," Victor finished. "Joseph." The name hung between them. Sophia shook her head slowly. "I met him. He gave me candy from his pocket when I was little. He was sad, quiet. I don't think he could have." "Fear makes people do terrible things, Solnishko," Victor said, his voice thick with a bitterness he usually reserved for his enemies. "Kirill could have threatened his family, offered him money. We will find him and we will ask." But finding a ghost proved difficult. Joseph's trail was cold. Victor's frustration grew, a palpable force in the penthouse. The external pressure mounted simultaneously. Marco Ferranti, the rival syndicate head, made his move. A flagship shipment of electronics through Victor's port authority was flagged by customs. An anonymous tip had been called in. It was a probing attack, testing Victor's focus and his grip on the bureaucracy he owned. Victor handled it with cold efficiency, a series of calls that had the container cleared within the hour, but the message was received. He was being watched, and his enemies sensed distraction. The crack in the fortress was widening. It was Sophia who, in her fragile state, made the connection everyone else had missed. She was looking at an old family photo Victor kept on a shelf, a faded picture of their parents outside the grocery. In the background, barely in frame, was the delivery van, and leaning against it, not Joseph, but a younger man smirking at the camera. "Who is that?" she asked. Victor took the photo. The man was Misha, his father's other part-time driver. A loud, boisterous kid who'd quit after a month, complaining the work was beneath him. Victor had forgotten about him entirely. "No one," Victor said, but a cold wire of suspicion tightened in his chest. Misha had been fired for petty theft, stealing from the register. His father had been too kind to press charges. A young man with sticky fingers and a grudge. The kind of young man Kirill's recruiters would spot in a heartbeat. "Leo," Victor said, his voice a low command. "Before Joseph, there was another driver, Misha. I don't know his last name. Find him." This search bore fruit with terrifying speed. Misha hadn't vanished. He'd thrived. He was now Mikhail Misha Volkov, head of security for a mid-tier logistics firm that was, upon deeper inspection, a shell company moving Ferranti's narcotics. The circle was closing with dizzying speed. The fired, resentful driver from his father's store was now a key lieutenant for his current rival. Coincidence was a luxury Victor didn't believe in. He decided on a direct approach. Not through force, but through the oldest currency in his world, information and fear. He had Misha brought to a neutral location, a closed restaurant owned by a silent partner. Misha, now a thick-necked man in an ill-fitting suit, was sweating profusely when Victor entered the room. "Victor Orlov," Misha said, forcing a smile. "Long time, heard you've done well for yourself." Victor didn't sit. He placed the old photo on the table between them, tapping the image of the young Misha by the van. "You worked for my father for a month. You stole from him." Misha's smile vanished. "Ancient history. I was a kid." "The night my parents died," Victor continued, his voice conversational. "The van used was stolen from the lot 2 days prior. You knew that lot. You knew the routine." Misha went pale. "I don't know anything about that." "Joseph Wozniak," Victor said, watching him like a hawk. "What happened to him?" A bead of sweat traced a path down Misha's temple. "I heard he took off. Scared after what happened to your folks." "Scared of what exactly?" Victor pressed. Misha's eyes darted toward the door where Leo stood impassively. "Look, Victor, Mr. Orlov, some doors you really don't want to open. That's from then. This is now. We're in different businesses." Victor leaned forward, his palms flat on the table. "We are in the same business, Misha, the business of secrets, and you have one I want. The truth about who stole that van. Was it you? Or did you help Joseph do it for Kirill?" Misha's bravado crumbled. "It was the name Kirill that did it. The ghost of the old boss still had power." "Kirill's gone," Misha whispered. "Let it stay buried." "My sister is not buried," Victor said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "She is alive, and she says the men who took her worked for Kirill. They showed her a report linking that van to my family. They wanted her to believe I was involved. Now, you will tell me who really stole that van and who gave the order, or you will find out what happens when I stop asking politely." Misha broke. It wasn't a grand confession, but a choked stream of terrified words. He hadn't stolen the van, but he'd been approached by one of Kirill's lieutenants, a man named Petrov, a week before the hit and run. They wanted information. The schedule, the keys, the habits. He gave them what he knew for a few $100s, thinking they were planning a simple theft of goods. He swore he didn't know it was for a murder. When he heard the news, he ran. Joseph, he claimed, was the fall guy, the one who reported the theft, probably under threat. Petrov was the key, the operational hand. Victor stored the name. Petrov, an old-school enforcer. Rumor was he'd retired after Kirill's fall, living off a pension no one believed was legitimate. As they left Misha shaking in the restaurant, Leo spoke quietly. "He'll call Ferranti the second we're out of sight. He's a liability." Victor nodded, his mind already elsewhere. "Handle it cleanly. Make it look like a rival action." The order was given without emotion. Misha's fate was sealed the moment he took Kirill's money 20 years ago. The past was claiming its due. Back at the Sovereign, Victor found Sophia waiting anxiously. "Well," she asked. "We have a name," he said. "Petrov. He was Kirill's man. He ran the operation that took you and likely the one that killed our parents." Sophia wrapped her arms around herself. "And this Petrov, where is he?" Victor's smile was thin and without warmth. "That is what we find out next, and when we find him, he will answer for every second of those 18 years. But as he initiated the search for the retired enforcer, a new alert flashed on his secure line. It was from his man inside the city's traffic control bureau. An unmarked sedan had been parked at alternating locations with a direct line of sight to the casino service entrance for 72 hours. It was running no plates, a professional surveillance team. They weren't watching for Victor. They were watching for a ghost to re-emerge. Sophia's fear was justified. They were already here. The surveillance changed everything. This was no longer about uncovering the past. It was an active, present threat. Victor's response was swift and surgical. He didn't have the car intercepted. Instead, he had a drone with thermal imaging hover 1,000 feet above it. It identified 2 occupants. Using city traffic cameras and facial recognition software run through a backdoor in the DMV, he had identities in under an hour. Low-level freelancers known for discreet work, often hired through cutouts. They were not Kirill's old guard. They were new money, Ferranti's money. The rival syndicate wasn't just probing. They had a specific interest in Victor's personal matter. The question was, how much did they know? Victor made a decision that crossed a line he'd long maintained. He brought Sophia into the command center. She stood, hesitant, amidst the glow of the monitors, looking like a visitor from another world. He pointed to the feed showing the sedan. "These men work for Marco Ferranti. He's trying to move in on my territory. They are watching for you." Sophia's face paled, but she held her ground. "Why? What does he want with me?" Victor said bluntly. "To force my hand, to make me concede a port, a contract, a piece of the city. If he knows who you are a weapon to use against me." He saw the shame flash in her eyes, the old feeling of being a burden. He spoke before she could. "No, this is not your fault. This is the business I built. But I need you to understand the reality. You cannot leave, not yet." Sophia nodded slowly, then pointed to another screen, showing a file photo of an older, grim-faced man. "Who is that?" "Petrov," Victor replied. "The man we are looking for." The search for the retired enforcer Petrov became all-consuming. Victor's network, a web of favors, bribes, and threats, strained under the dual pressure of an internal hunt and external defense. Ferranti, emboldened, escalated. A fire broke out in a warehouse Victor used for storing art, a legitimate front for his collection. It was arson, clumsy but effective. A message: "I can touch what you love." The attack was a misdirection, but it hit closer to home than Ferranti could have known. It forced Victor to double Sophia's security detail and consider moving her from the casino entirely. A logistical nightmare. Then a break. Petrov hadn't retired to the countryside. He was in the city, living under an assumed name in a modest apartment in a neighborhood that had once been Kirill's stronghold. The arrogance of it, or perhaps the sentimentality, was striking. Leo proposed a standard extraction: grab him in the night, bring him to a secure site. Victor vetoed it. He's old. He's been waiting for this knock for 20 years. We do it in daylight. We talk in his home. He'll respect that. Or he'll fear it more. They went at noon. Victor took only Leo. The apartment was on the third floor of a walk-up that smelled of cabbage and old wood. Petrov answered the door himself. He was in his 70s now, stooped, but his eyes were the sharp, cold eyes of a man who had seen too much. He showed no surprise. "Victor Orlov," he rasped, stepping aside. "I wondered when you'd finish the circle." The apartment was neat, sparse, filled with the ghosts of a solitary life. A single framed photo on a sideboard showed a young woman. Petrov saw Victor looking. "My daughter, she doesn't speak to me, thinks I was a security guard." He gave a bitter, phlegmy cough. "So, you found the sister." Victor didn't sit. "You took her. You used a stolen van from my father's lot to kill my parents. You worked for Kirill." Petrov settled slowly into a worn armchair as if the weight of the accusations were physical. "I did many things for Kirill, yes. The girl, that was a job, a simple snatch. She was meant to be an insurance policy. He was afraid of you even then, saw the fire in you. And my parents," Victor's voice was dangerously quiet. Petrov looked at his hands, gnarled and spotted with age. "That was not a job, that was a punishment." He looked up, his gaze unwavering. "Your father refused Kirill, yes, but it was more than that. He had evidence. Ledgers secretly kept of Kirill's early smuggling through the port. Your father was a moral man. He threatened to go to the authorities." This was new. A completely different motive. Victor's father wasn't just a random victim of extortion. He was a targeted whistleblower. "So Kirill had him killed," Victor stated. Petrov shook his head slowly. "No," the single word hung in the dusty air. "Kirill gave the order, but the method, the hit and run with your own van, that was my idea." He said it with a weary pride, the last vestige of a professional's arrogance. "It was elegant, it looked like an accident. It destroyed the vehicle that might have traces, and it planted a seed of doubt should anyone ever look too closely. A seed that, it seems, grew into a terrible tree." He was referring to the lie fed to Sophia. The report shown to her wasn't just to frame Victor. It was a perverse piece of operational cover, blurring the lines of the original crime. Victor felt a rage so pure it was almost calm. "You showed my sister a fake report. You made her believe I was involved," Petrov shrugged. "The man who took her to Europe, one of my subordinates, was overzealous. He thought it would keep her compliant, make her hate you, fear you. It worked, didn't it?" The casual cruelty of it took Victor's breath away. His whole life and Sophia's suffering built on this man's elegant idea and a subordinate's improvisation. "Where is Joseph Wozniak?" Leo asked, his hand resting lightly inside his jacket. Petrov's face crumpled truly for the first time. "Dead. 2 weeks after the funeral. He was unstable, guilt-ridden. He was going to talk to a priest, couldn't be allowed." So Joseph had been a coerced pawn, then a loose end. Silenced. Another life on the ledger. Victor had what he needed. The truth, ugly and complete. He turned to leave. Petrov's voice stopped him. "Orlov." Victor looked back. The old enforcer's expression was unreadable. "You won, you took it all from Kirill, you built something he could only dream of. But you are here in this room asking about things 20 years dead. The past is a trap. Ferranti knows you're in it. He will use it to break you." It was a warning, perhaps the only honest thing left in him. Victor didn't reply. He and Leo left the building. In the car, Leo looked at him. "Orders?" Victor stared out the window at the passing city, the kingdom he'd built on a foundational lie. "Petrov dies of natural causes, a heart attack in his sleep, tonight." It was a mercy Petrov didn't deserve, but Victor was not Kirill. He would not slaughter an old man in his chair, but he would not let him live. Returning to the sovereign, Victor felt no catharsis, only a hollow exhaustion. He relayed the truth to Sophia, sparing her no detail. She cried for her parents, for her stolen years, for the simple, good man Joseph who was also a victim. She also cried in relief. The monster she'd feared for 18 years, the brother she thought capable of complicity, did not exist. The real monster was a dead old boss and a retired enforcer with an elegant idea. The truth, however, was a weapon without a handle. It couldn't be used, it could only be carried. And Ferranti was not done. The surveillance team was pulled, replaced with a new, more aggressive tactic. A package arrived at the casino's main desk, addressed to Victor Orlov, personal and confidential. Inside was not a threat but an offer, a printed proposal for a merger of certain logistics operations. Attached was a grainy, long-lens photo. It showed Sophia, taken just days ago, sitting by the window in the medical suite, her face in profile. The message was clear: I see your vulnerability. I can reach it, let's talk. Ferranti had moved from observation to direct extortion. He didn't want a war, he wanted a partnership under duress. A hostile takeover using Sophia as the leverage. Victor could crush Ferranti in a street war, but not without risking exposure, not without pulling resources that would leave other flanks unguarded, and not without potentially putting Sophia in the crossfire during the chaos. The elegant solution, the business solution, was to negotiate. To give up a piece of his empire to buy her permanent safety. But yielding to extortion was a death sentence in his world. It would invite every other predator to circle. He had Sophia moved to a safe house, a nondescript property in a quiet suburb under 24-hour guard. He instructed Leo to set a meeting with Ferranti on neutral ground to discuss the proposal. He would play the part of the concerned brother, willing to deal, but Victor had no intention of dealing. The meeting was a target acquisition exercise. He would look Ferranti in the eye and know his measure. The plan was forming, a dangerous, all-in gambit. He would not give Ferranti a port. He would take Ferranti's entire operation. To do that, he needed to turn Ferranti's own weapon against him. He needed to use Sophia, not as a liability, but as bait. When he explained this to Sophia in the safe house, she didn't flinch. The woman who had survived 18 years on the streets, who had been a pawn her entire life, looked at her brother with a fierce, hard light in her eyes. "What do I need to do?" she asked. In that moment, Victor didn't see his lost little sister. He saw an Orlov. He saw his own reflection. The circle was indeed complete, but not in the way Petrov had meant. The past had forged two weapons, not just one. And they were both ready to strike. The meeting with Marco Ferranti was set for a private dining room atop the Meridian Hotel, a neutral venue owned by a reclusive Swiss family. Victor arrived with Leo and two other men, all of them visibly armed, a statement of power rather than concealment. Ferranti was already there, a florid man in his 50s with a carefully tailored suit and the condescending smile of a man who believes he holds the winning hand. He was flanked by 4 guards. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and mutual disdain. "Victor," Ferranti said, not rising from his seat, "I'm glad you saw reason. These conflicts are so bad for business." Victor took the chair opposite him, his posture relaxed, his eyes cold. "You have a proposal. I'm here to listen." Ferranti slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. It outlined the terms: a 51% stake in Victor's port logistics subsidiary, effectively giving Ferranti control of the critical shipping channel. In return, Ferranti's associates would cease all interest in Victor's personal affairs. The extortion was naked, brazen. Victor didn't look at the paper. "And my sister's safety, this guarantees it." Ferranti's smile widened. "Of course, we are businessmen, not barbarians. She would be left in peace. You have my word." Victor knew the word of a man who used photos of vulnerable women as bargaining chips was worthless. The meeting was a pantomime. Victor's real objective was to confirm Ferranti's obsession, to see the greed in his eyes. He saw it. It was bottomless. "I need 48 hours to consult with my lawyers," Victor said, standing. "The structure is complex." Ferranti looked mildly disappointed, as if he'd expected immediate capitulation. 48 hours, but understand, Victor, the market is volatile. The value of your assets and your family could depreciate quickly. The threat was clear. Victor gave a curt nod and left. In the elevator down, Leo spoke. "He's already moving crews toward the port. He expects your surrender." "Good," Victor said. "Let him get comfortable. Is everything ready on our end?" Leo nodded. "The bait is set." The bait was Sophia. The plan was audacious. Using a double, a young woman from Leo's extended family who bore a passing resemblance, they would stage a sighting. The double, accompanied by a visibly nervous handler, would check into a mid-tier hotel near the airport, a location suggesting a plan to flee the city. The intention was to draw Ferrante's attention, to make him commit resources to intercept her, believing Victor was trying to spirit her away. It was a classic misdirection. While Ferrante focused on the airport, Victor would strike at the heart of his operation, his primary counting house, where the week's narcotics proceeds were being tallied. Sophia's role was critical. She wasn't the double, she was the planner. Having lived on the streets, she understood invisibility, pattern breaking, and the psychology of desperation. She designed the double's movements, the furtive glances, the cash payment, the single small suitcase. It had to feel authentic. From the safe house, she monitored the operation via encrypted feed, her input steady and sharp. "The handler needs to check his watch again, more obviously," she said into a comms unit. "He's anxious about a flight, sell it." Victor watched her, this new version of his sister emerging from the trauma, and felt a surge of fierce pride. The hook was taken. Within 2 hours of the double's check-in, Ferrante's men were in place around the hotel. His best crew, the ones who'd been on the casino surveillance, were redirected. The trap was sprung. At 10 p.m., as Ferrante's accountants worked in a fortified office above a nightclub, Victor's team hit it. Not with a noisy assault, but with a silent takeover of the building's security and communications. The accountants found themselves locked in, their screens gone dark, with Victor's men waiting calmly in the room. The message was clear: we own your money, we own your people, we are inside your walls. Simultaneously, the double and her handler evaporated from the hotel, leaving behind a confused void for Ferrante's men. The real strike, however, was financial. Using the access gained from the counting house, Victor's hackers initiated a series of cascading transfers, siphoning a substantial portion of Ferrante's liquid assets into a maze of offshore accounts. It wasn't theft for profit. It was a demonstration of absolute vulnerability. The final touch was a direct call to Ferrante's private line. Victor, sitting in his command center with Sophia listening beside him, made the call. "Marco, your proposal had a flaw," Victor said, his voice devoid of triumph, just stating a fact. "You assumed I had something to lose. My sister is an Orlov. We don't lose, we take. You now have 30% of the capital you had this morning. The crews you sent to my port are being met by federal authorities tipped off about concealed weapons, and your counting house is now my satellite office." There was a long, strangled silence on the other end. Ferrante was a bully, not a strategist. He'd overplayed his hand against a man for whom family was not a weakness, but the core of his strength. You Ferrante sputtered. "I already have," Victor replied. "Here is my proposal. You will disband your operations in this city. You will leave. If you ever return, or if any harm ever comes to anyone under my protection from any quarter, the remaining 70% of your money vanishes, and I release every financial record we just copied to the IRS, the DEA, and your rivals in New Jersey. Do we understand each other?" The line went dead. Ferrante had hung up, defeated. The war was over in a single night, without a single shot fired in anger. It was a victory built on information, leverage, and the cold, precise application of power. Sophia let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Is it done?" she asked. Victor looked at the screens, then at her. "It's done." In the weeks that followed, a new equilibrium was established. Ferrante's organization dissolved, its assets quietly absorbed or scattered. The city's underworld understood the message. Victor Orlov's family was off limits, and his reach was longer and sharper than ever. But the true change was internal. Sophia moved out of the safe house, not back into the casino penthouse, but into a renovated townhouse within the sovereign security perimeter. It was her own space. Victor provided security, but she chose the decor, the routine, the life. She began therapy to process the trauma of her abduction, and she started taking business classes online, curious about the empire her brother had built. One evening, she came to Victor's study. He was reviewing architectural plans for a new community center, a legitimate project in their parents' old neighborhood. "I want a job," she said plainly. Victor leaned back. "You don't need a job." "I don't need an allowance either," she countered. "I need a purpose. You built all this because of what happened to us. Let me help you run the part that's actually good." She pointed to the community center plans. He studied her, seeing the determined set of her jaw so like their mother. "The charitable foundation," he said slowly. "It's mostly a tax vehicle, but it could be more, it could be real." "Let me make it real," she said. He nodded. It was settled. The final piece of the past was laid to rest on a bright autumn day. Victor and Sophia visited their parents' grave, a well-kept plot they hadn't stood before together in over 2 decades. They brought white roses. Sophia placed a small, smooth stone from the riverbank in Marseille on the headstone, a piece of where she'd been. Victor placed a simple, old-fashioned key, a replica of the one to their parents' grocery, a symbol of what had been taken. They stood in silence for a long time, the ghosts between them finally acknowledged, their power finally softened. That night back at the Sovereign, Victor hosted a small, private dinner, just him, Sophia, and Leo. It was the first normal moment in a chain of catastrophes and revelations. Over the meal, Sophia looked at her brother. "The night I collapsed in the rain, I wasn't just there by chance. I was coming to find you." Victor paused, his glass halfway to his lips. "What?" She took a deep breath. "For years, I was too scared, but I got stronger. I saved money. I got fake papers. I came back to the city 6 months ago. I've been working my way closer, watching the casino, trying to find the courage to walk in. That storm, it wasn't an accident that brought me to your door. It was the end of a very long journey home." She had chosen him, too, just as he had chosen to bring her in from the rain. Victor Orlov, the untouchable king, found he had no words. The sister he thought he'd failed had, in her own way, been fighting to return to him all along. The storm hadn't washed a ghost to his doorstep. It had welcomed a survivor home. The empire he built for vengeance would now have a new purpose, shaped by the sister who helped him reclaim their history. And for the first time in 18 years, the future felt like something more than just the next strategic move. It felt like a promise kept. So, what became of the king and the ghost? The storm that night did more than reveal a hidden face. It shattered a carefully constructed world, forcing Victor Orlov to rebuild it on a foundation of truth rather than vengeance. The Sapphire Sovereign Casino still glitters, a monument to power, but its profits now feed a different machine. The Orlov Foundation, overseen by Sophia, quietly funds shelters, addiction recovery programs, and legal aid in the same neighborhoods their family's tragedy once devastated. The empire of fear began its slow, deliberate pivot toward legacy. But this story leaves us with a haunting question. Can the methods of a dark world ever build something truly light? Victor used the ruthless efficiency of his criminal network to dismantle a rival and protect his sister. He used surveillance, intimidation, and financial warfare, tools of his trade, to achieve a noble end. Does the end justify the means when the end is redemption? Sophia's return forced a moral reckoning not just for her brother, but for the very system he commanded. The most powerful armor, it turns out, wasn't in the bulletproof glass or the armed guards, but in the vulnerability of accepting a lost piece of himself. Their story echoes in the silent spaces of our own lives. It asks what we build our lives upon, what narratives we accept without question, what ghosts we refuse to face. Victor built a fortress on a lie. Sophia survived on a different lie. It was only when the storm forced a collision of those false truths that something real could finally be constructed. The past is not a life sentence unless we allow it to be. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing isn't a rival's threat, but the story we've been telling ourselves in the dark. The next time you see a storm or pass by a glittering facade, remember that within every fortress there might be a hidden room, and within every seemingly untouchable person, there might be a single fragile key that unlocks everything. The world is full of unfinished stories, waiting for the courage to turn the page. What hidden truth is waiting for your storm? Dive deeper into the stories that reshape reality. Subscribe and let's uncover the next one together.